Hello everyone and welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to share a new story with you. So let's get started. Imagine being in a marriage you believed was happy, secure in your future, only to have everything change with just one overheard conversation. That's exactly what happened to me when a single sentence from my wife to her sister turned my world upside down. What would you do in my situation? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments as I recount how I made a decision that marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The sound of the alarm at 6:30 a.m. abruptly woke me, and the familiar aroma of brewing coffee in the kitchen provided a sense of comfort. Over the 6 years of our marriage, this routine had become something I cherished. Jessica was already up, bustling around the house with her usual morning energy that never failed to impress me. After stretching for a moment, I made my way to the kitchen where Jessica greeted me with a bright smile, handing me a hot cup of coffee. Her hazel eyes sparkled just as meeting her again, just like the first time, strengthened my belief in our invincibility as a couple with moments like these. We discussed our plans over breakfast, Jessica's busy day at the marketing firm, and my client meeting in the afternoon. The routine was ordinary and comforting, or so I thought. Later that day, Jessica's sister Amanda arrived for the weekend. Amanda, who was quite different from Jessica in her quiet and reserved nature, always had long catch-up sessions with her sister when she visited. This gave me the opportunity to work on my woodworking projects in the garage, which I enjoyed. As I passed through the living room to get a drink from the kitchen that evening, I observed Jessica and Amanda having a good time and laughing over a glass of wine. Their laughter abruptly stopped when they noticed me. Jessica's cheeks slightly reddened, but she quickly composed herself, mentioning that they were simply having a girl chat. I responded with a smile, telling them not to let me interrupt as I went to grab my drink returning to my project. I didn't pay much attention to it initially. However, upon reflection, I perceived a guarded look in Jessica's eyes when she gazed at me. Gradually, I started noticing other subtle changes. Jessica seemed preoccupied with her phone, always angling the screen away from me as I passed by. She also started coming home late from work, justifying it with reasons like a major project or a late meeting. I assumed it was all due to work pressures and chose not to probe further. Trust was the foundation of our marriage, or so I believed. The arrival of Amanda only added to the growing unease. There was an unspoken tension in the air during their hushed conversations and exchanged glances that left me unsettled. When I raised my concerns with Jessica, she casually dismissed it, attributing it to sisters catching up on family matters. Nonetheless, a nagging feeling persisted that I was being excluded from something significant. That Saturday evening, after Jessica and Amanda went out for drinks, I stayed up, waiting for their returning home near midnight. I heard their laughter as they entered through the front door. Pretending to be asleep, I eavesdropped on their conversations in the living room. Amanda mentioned something about settling, followed by Jessica's hollow laughter. Jessica's tone lowered as she expressed uncertainty about her decision. These words, though vague, left me unsettled. I tried to dismiss it as the alcohol speaking, but a nagging doubt lingered. By Sunday morning, Amanda had departed, leaving me alone with Jessica, who appeared her usual self. As she left for work, a sense of unease crept over me, triggered by the abandoned coffee cup. From the first time, I questioned the solidity of our relationship. Late that still, quiet night, the sound of the clock ticking in the background seemed abnormally loud. I had assumed Jessica had gone to bed hours earlier, but as I sat in my study attempting to concentrate on my work, my thoughts kept drifting. That lingering uneasiness from the weekend persisted, refusing to let go. Despite my efforts to dismiss it, the sense of disquiet stuck to me like a shadow. Deciding to get a glass of water from the kitchen, I made my way past the living room, only to hear what sounded like Jessica and Amanda chatting. Yet Amanda had left days ago. A rush of adrenaline surged through me as I inched closer to the living room entrance, hesitating just before peeking inside. Jessica's hushed and pointed conversation on the phone drifted towards me in the dimly lit room. "I know," she said with exasperation in her voice. "It's not as if I intended for this to happen. There was a moment of silence before she continued. My heart raced as I strained to discern the muted voice on the other end of the call. Jessica let out a heavy sigh, her words carrying a hint of frustration. It's just, I feel trapped. Michael is a good person, but he lacks excitement. I don't understand how I got to this point. Her tone dripped with bitterness as she spoke. If only I'd had the opportunity for a fresh start. I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't pursue a relationship with him. I wouldn't walk down the aisle with him. The color drained from my face as I clutched the door frame, trying to process the shocking revelation. She wouldn't choose me again. Did she regret our marriage? How long had she been feeling this way? It seemed like the person on the other end of the line, likely her sister Amanda, said something indiscernible. Jessica let out a bitter laugh. It wasn't just that. She admitted to feeling like she settled, and now she was pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. The word settled hit me like a blow to the stomach. Was that how she saw me? A compromise? A safe bet? She harbored regrets. As the conversation unfolded, each word felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my heart. Have you told him? Amanda's voice grew clearer. No, Jessica answered swiftly. What's the use? I'm not going to leave him. It's comfortable, safe, and well. There's someone else, she hesitated before revealing. Those three simple words shattered any remaining hope I had for our marriage. Someone else. He stood, bracing myself against the wall, taking shallow breaths. Every fiber of my being urged me to storm into the room and confront her, to demand explanations. But I resisted the impulse, staying rooted where I was and simply listening. Jessica's voice continued, trying to reassure herself that it was nothing serious, just someone from work who made her feel alive again. The words echoed in my mind, causing my heart to ache. Retreating into the shadows without making a sound, I managed to return to the study and quietly shut the door behind me. Sitting in the darkness, I stared blankly at my desk, my hands trembling. Her words played over in my head, each one feeling like a fresh wound. The realization dawned on me that she didn't love me, regretted our marriage, and was seeing someone else. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers and explanations. But another part, tired of feeling neglected and unfulfilled, whispered that it didn't matter anymore. Her words said everything that needed to be said. I sat immobile for hours, consumed by a mixture of anger, sadness, and a sense of being let down. As the first light of dawn seeped through the blinds, my decision was clear. There was no salvaging what was left. I couldn't remain with someone who didn't care for me, someone who viewed me as a mistake. Jessica might have settled for me, but I refused to settle for a life founded on falsehoods. Silently, I began to pack my belongings. The house was quiet as I moved about, the early morning sun casting elongated shadows throughout the rooms. Jessica still slept, her gentle breathing audible from the bedroom. As I carefully sifted through the closet gathering my things, my hand shook. I'd retrieved a duffel bag from the shelf, each movement seeming burdensome, as if every motion was weighed down by the gravity of my actions. I packed only the necessities: clothes, my laptop, a few keepsakes such as the watch my late father had gifted me, and the leather-bound journal where I occasionally recorded my thoughts. I didn't want to. To avoid causing a scene or attracting attention, I simply aimed to depart before she woke up. The most challenging aspect was parting with the remnants of our shared existence. The framed photos on the dresser capturing our smiles at the Grand Canyon, the array of quirky coffee mugs we had amassed together, and even the cozy blanket that had wrapped us during countless movie nights. All these items seemed to belong to a different realm, one where I no longer fit. As I sealed my bag, my gaze landed on a small wooden box resting on my nightstand. Within it lay the handwritten letter I had gifted Jessica on our inaugural wedding anniversary, a heartfelt testament to my love and devotion to her. Acting on impulse, I retrieved the letter and placed it atop my belongings. It was as if reclaiming it was a minor means of recovering something I had lost. Pausing at the kitchen table before departing, I hesitated. I felt a debt of explanation to her, yet I found myself at a loss for words. Every attempt at writing felt insufficient in light of, after overhearing what I needed to I quickly wrote a brief note on a piece of paper I found in the drawer. The message read, "I heard you. I hope you find the happiness you're seeking, Michael." Placing the note on the counter for her to see, I lingered for a moment staring at it. Part of me wished for her to awaken, rush out, and plead for me to stay, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't happen. I turned away and exited the house, feeling the cold morning air hit me sharply. Stepping into the driveway, I noticed my car parked at the curb. Loading my bag into the trunk, I cast one final glance at the house. The curtains in our bedroom were shut, and there was a slight movement behind them. Perhaps she was watching. Did she hear me depart? In that moment, those thoughts felt trivial. I couldn't allow myself to dwell on them. The drive away from the house seemed surreal, as if I were detached from my own body. The roads I knew so well blurred as I headed nowhere in particular. Eventually, I arrived at a roadside diner and pulled into the parking lot, although my stomach was too twisted to eat. I think the waitress brought me a cup of coffee, and I stared into the dark liquid, my reflection distorted in its surface. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the life I thought we had, anger at her betrayal, and oddly enough, a flicker of relief. I was free now, free from pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at a modest motel on the edge of town. The room was small and smelled faintly of bleach, but it was clean and, more importantly, quiet. I dropped my bag on the floor, sank onto the bed, and let the exhaustion overtake me. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to cry. It wasn't the kind of dramatic sobbing you see in movies, just silent tears running down my face as I lay staring at the ceiling. I cried for the love I thought we had, for the future we planned, and for the man I'd been before I overheard those words. As the sun set outside the thin motel curtains, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Jessica might have seen. Many people saw me as safe and unexciting, but I knew I was more than that. It was time to prove it to her, to myself, and to anyone else who doubted me. Tomorrow, I would start over. The morning sunlight crept through the cheap curtains of the motel room, painting the walls with a muted gold. I hadn't slept much, and my body ached from tossing and turning all night. My thoughts were chaotic, replaying the words I'd overheard, and the life I had just walked away from. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's story. But this was my reality now, and I had no choice but to face it. I forced myself to get up, take a shower, and dress. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, and the faint lines around them looked deeper than they had the day before. I rubbed my face and took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was just a new beginning, no matter how painful it felt. After checking out of the motel, I found a small diner nearby. The smell of fresh coffee, and bacon provided comfort as I sat in a corner booth, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone. The sudden shift in my life was starkly apparent. Just yesterday, I was at home making dinner plans with my wife. Now I found myself starting anew, armed only with a duffel bag and a broken heart. Seeking guidance, I reached out to Brandon, my longtime college best friend. "Mike, what's wrong?" Brandon's concerned voice filled the line. "I left Jessica," I confessed abruptly. The weight of my words hung in the air, the reality sinking in as I said them aloud. After a brief silence, Brandon responded, "What? Why? What happened?" Uncertain of how much to reveal, I eventually acknowledged she no longer loves me. "She's been seeing someone else." "Oh my God," Brandon reacted quietly. "I'm so sorry, man. How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted, but I couldn't continue living a lie after learning the truth. With a reassuring tone, Brandon replied, "You made the right choice." "You?" I declined the offer, recognizing that I deserved better. Instead of staying with Brandon, I knew I needed to tackle my challenges independently. Running away would not solve my problems. I needed to confront them directly in order to begin rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I spent several days searching for a new place to live, facing obstacles such as high costs and distant locations. Eventually, I discovered a modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Though humbled, it marked a new beginning for me. Signing the lease felt like a triumph, a symbolic gesture of regaining control over my own destiny. As I settled into my new home, I found that it lacked personal touches, feeling somewhat empty and impersonal. Determined to make it mine own, I resolved to decorate it with elements that reflected my identity, not the past life I shared with Jessica. During the evenings when loneliness loomed large, I sought comfort in various activities in woodworking. I always found joy in crafting with my hands, and now it had become a crucial source of comfort for me. Spending countless hours in the cramped garage of my apartment building, I meticulously sanded, carved, and shaped wood into beautiful furniture pieces. The repetitive movements were therapeutic, offering me a sense of purpose and tranquility. Alongside woodworking, therapy played a vital role in my journey. Initially hesitant about its necessity, Brandon encouraged me to give it a chance. My therapist, Dr. Lang, exuded a calming and patient demeanor as he skillfully guided me through the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. Through his guidance, I learned that my self-worth was not dependent on Jessica's opinion of me, and that her actions were a reflection of her own struggles, not a reflection of my shortcomings. The most challenging part was resisting the temptation to reach out to her. Despite moments of wanting to demand answers and explanations, I ultimately understood that her decision was final, leading me to focus on my personal growth instead. Gradually, I began to rediscover myself. I channeled my energy into work, invested in my hobbies, and rekindled relationships with old friends. This intricate process wasn't easy, but with every step, I felt a bit more like myself again. There were still days when the weight of everything threatened to crush me, but I kept moving forward one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. This was my life now, and I was determined to make the most of it. A few weeks had passed since I left Jessica, and the pain, though still present, had dulled to a manageable ache. I had settled into my small apartment, decorated it with some of my woodworking projects, and was starting to regain a sense of normalcy. Work kept me busy, and therapy helped me process my emotions. Yet there was still a lingering question that I couldn't shake. How deep did Jessica's betrayal run? The answer came unexpectedly on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had just returned from the grocery store when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amanda. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, and seeing her name stirred a mix of emotions. Amanda. Hey Michael, can we meet? I think there's something you should know. Staring at the message, my chest tightening. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, me sure. When and where? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, sipping my coffee and staring out the window, trying to anticipate what she might say. When Amanda walked in, she looked nervous, her eyes darting around until she spotted me. She offered a small, tentative smile as she slid into the seat across from me. Thanks for meeting me, she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. What's this about, Amanda? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath. I've been feeling guilty ever since you left. I need to tell you the truth about what's been going on. My stomach dropped. Go on. Amanda hesitated, then began speaking in a rush, as though she was afraid she might lose her nerve. Jessica's been seeing someone from work. His name is Kyle. It started a few months ago. At first, it was just flirting, but then it turned into more. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening around my coffee cup. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did you let me walk around clueless for so long? I didn't know how to, Amanda admitted, her voice trembling. Jessica is my sister, but what she did was wrong. When I realized how serious it was, I tried to convince her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. She said C made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did she ever love me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Amanda's eyes softened. She did, Michael. I know she did, But somewhere along the way she lost sight of what she had. She started taking you for granted. That's no excuse for what she did, but it's the truth. I nodded, my throat tight. Thank you for telling me. There's more, Amanda said, looking away. Jessica doesn't know I'm here. She's been trying to reach you. She wants to talk to explain herself. I shook my head. There's nothing she can say that will change what she did. I've moved on, or at least I'm trying to. Amanda reached across the table, and poised to continue, I gently placed her hand on mine and whispered, "You're a good man, Michael. You didn't deserve any of this. I hope you find someone who sees that." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a mix of emotions, lighter yet heavier at the same time. Amanda's confession confirmed my suspicions, but also brought a strange sense of closure. Jessica's actions were her own, not a reflection of my value. She was searching for something she thought was missing, but in the process, she had shattered the life we had built together. That evening, as I sat in my apartment, I opened the journal I had taken from the house. Flipping through the pages, I revisited old entries where I had expressed my love for Jessica and dreams for our future. For the first time, those memories no longer felt like painful stabs. They were just a part of my journey, a chapter that had closed. Closing the journal and placing it back on the shelf, I realized it was time to start writing the next chapter. Walking down the quiet street, the crisp autumn air had a bite to it, the golden leaves crunching under my feet after parting ways with Jessica and enduring the heartache of her betrayal. 3 months had passed since I last donned my boots. The ache in my heart was gradually subsiding, replaced by a growing sense of tranquility. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the new beginnings I was forging for myself. Immersing myself in woodworking, I transformed the cramped confines of my apartment's garage into a workshop. Orders for bespoke furniture were steadily streaming in, primarily through glowing referrals. The act of shaping raw wood into beautiful pieces had ceased to be a mere pastime. It had evolved into a form of solace. Yet it wasn't solely the labor that anchored me. I began reconnecting with old friends, sharing moments over coffee or drinks, and basking in their unwavering support that reminded me of my intrinsic worth beyond my previous marriage. I cautiously dipped my toes into the realm of dating, experiencing a mix of curiosity, exhilaration, and trepidation. During one fateful visit to a local bookstore, while perusing the shelves, I encountered someone who caught my eye. Oh, and her name was Rachel. She had auburn hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and a smile that seemed to light up the room. I noticed her standing in the aisle flipping through a book on photography. "You know, that one's really good," I said, nodding toward the book in her hands. "The author does an amazing job explaining light and shadow." She looked up, surprised, and then smiled. "You're a photographer?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I dabble. Mostly landscapes. Woodworking is more my thing." Her eyes lit up. "That's so cool. I've always admired people who can create something with their hands." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, we were sitting in the bookstore cafe, laughing over cups of coffee. Rachel had a way of making me feel at ease, like I didn't have to pretend to be anything other than who I was. She shared stories about her work as a freelance graphic designer, and I found myself telling her about my journey. The good, the bad, and everything in between. The afternoon had transitioned seamlessly into evening. Rachel checked the time on her watch and let out a sigh. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a deadline to meet," she mentioned. Reflecting on the pleasant moment we had shared, I agreed, feeling a warmth that had been absent for a while. "Maybe we could do this again sometime," I suggested. With a smile, she swiftly jotted down her number on a napkin and handed it to me. "Call me." As she walked away, a mix of hope, excitement, and cautious optimism washed over me, hinting that perhaps there was life beyond heartbreak. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment, I contemplated how much had changed. The person who had once abandoned Jessica and left her feeling broken was now a distant memory, a mere shadow of who I had become. While I knew I hadn't completely healed, there were fewer moments now when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm me. Through the pain of Jessica's betrayal, I had discovered a newfound appreciation for myself, acknowledging the parts of me I had neglected and the dreams I had set aside put on hold. I discovered a newfound inner strength that had eluded me before. While this wasn't the path I would have initially chosen, I was determined to navigate it with purpose. Days later, I found myself back at the bookstore alongside Rachel, engaged in hours of conversation and shared laughter. I experienced a genuine connection for the first time in months. Although uncertain of where this relationship would lead, for the present moment, it brought solace. As months turned into a year, I realized that while life was far from perfect, it had become good. Jessica attempted to reach out a few times, leaving unanswered voicemails. I no longer harbored hatred towards her. Instead, I recognized that I no longer required her presence in my life. Embracing forgiveness, I learned that it was more about freeing myself from the weight of resentment than absolving her of her actions. One bright afternoon, standing back after sanding down a chair in my workshop, I took in my handiwork. Beyond the chair itself, I saw the reflection of everything I had rebuilt since that pivotal night. My life, much like the wood beneath my fingertips, had been reshaped, polished, and fortified. And for the first time in a long while, it's been a while since I felt complete. I appreciate you sticking around until the end. If the story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button. It just takes a moment, but it holds special significance for us. Remember to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on our future videos, and don't forget to ring the notification bell to be among the first to watch them. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.